Hello, everybody. Can folks let us know if you can hear us in the chat bar? Hi, everyone. Are folks able to hear us? If you take a look at your screen, you'll see probably on your right side a little software dashboard. And inside that software dashboard, you're going to have several options. If you take a look under audio, for example, you can troubleshoot how you are hearing things. We are sharing our webcam, so if you select webcam and turn it on, you'll be able to see all of the presenters today, including the PowerPoint that we're sharing with the audience right now. And do you want to go ahead and get us started? Yeah, I'll go ahead and get us started. Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cierra, Olivia Thomas-Williams, and I'm a webcam today. Yay! You can see me. We are just waiting a few minutes for people to log in. I am eagerly awaiting your questions. If you have any kind of assistance that you might need, you can contact either any of us on this team by typing in a question. And a thank you to Melissa for letting us know that you can hear us just fine. I just want to let you know that I still am coughing a little bit, so I might need to excuse myself and just appreciate your willingness to abide the hacking if it happens. You have joined us for webinar number 8 today. Nothing about us without us. This is about accessible organizing, and this is actually the webinar development crew with you today. It's me, Skye, and Jody, and we collaborate to bring you wonderful content each year. We collaborate with the Indiana Abuse Prevention Disability Task Force, and what we are doing is working together to really identify what the current sexual violence intervention infrastructure is for people with disabilities in the state of Indiana. That comes as a consequence of, or that information is revealed in trying to identify what the current sexual violence prevention infrastructure is, and really taking a look at what we have and what we still need. And so we are working on a ton of projects together this year, and this is just one of them. And before we go ahead and get started on letting you know what kind of accessibility we have for our webinar today, I do just want to let you know that today it is not possible to provide you with a comprehensive accessibility training in 1.5 hours. In fact, I think you could spend a week on it in conference, like a conference setting, and not learn everything that you needed to learn. And so what we're providing you today is with many years of experience as people with disabilities, but also as people wanting to work with other people with disabilities. And we're going to share the lessons that we've learned along the way in the work that we do as a team for sexual violence primary prevention. Okay, let's get into the housekeeping stuff. So we're recording this, and you may have noticed that you have been muted upon entering the room. And that is just so that we don't experience tons of background noise and feedback. We are using our webcam today, and we think it's a little bit easier to keep people engaged if they can see and hear the people speaking. So we are providing that. So what you want to do is turn those on, and you will find those in your software dashboard. We are providing you with closed captioning today, and I have dropped the URL or the website that you need to go to in your chat box. And so if you can go to that chat box, you should be able to see the URL to open a new window in which you can see every word that we are saying as we say it. And I just want to send a huge shout out to our transcriber. Her name is Skye Cordova, and she is joining us from somewhere in the United States today to provide this service for us. We do have several options for help. If you look at your software dashboard, there is a help button on the top menu, and that can get you to the technical people who know all the things that you might need help with. And I just want to let you know that you will receive a copy of this about an hour after the webinar, along with an evaluation form that we hope you will fill out and let us know things that we may have forgotten or things we need to learn. There was one last thing I wanted to say. I believe that is, handout. Okay. You have 5 handouts in your handout screen. And so if you go into your software dashboard and click the button that says handout, you're going to find an FAQ, a frequently asked questions, for some of the common troubleshooting issues that you might face. You're going to find URL for the live captioning and a little bit more information that you might need to troubleshoot anything that might come up. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. We're crew 3 right now, and we thought that we would spend approximately 20 minutes covering something, a topic around accessibility that we feel that has really come to the forefront in our work, or things that we feel like people need to know. And so what we're going to do is we're going to spend 20 minutes with Jody, and then we're going to spend 20 minutes with Skye and 20 minutes with me, and then we're going to address questions and have a resource sharing bonanza. And we do have new resources. If you did join us on the prior to webinars, we have some additional resources to share with you today. And I believe that is all for me. Oh, I have one more thing. As a bio, I'll introduce you to myself. The next slide is just a bio of me, and I took up Skye's challenge. Skye decided to challenge themselves to provide different pictures each webinar, and I thought, yes, that's a fabulous idea. So one of the things that I love to do over the summer, and this is going to sound so fogey and old, but I don't care because it's delightful. And also it's okay to be old. I love to watch flowers be born. I love to watch them unfold. And so what I've done, I've shown you a picture of coneflower, what it can look like as a baby and it grows a mullet. It's really interesting. I love it. I shared with you also pictures of the fruit of my first major organizing endeavor. I was a teenager when I was 16 in Sonoma, California. We used to get a lot of flack for skateboarding all over like the bank's property and stuff like that. And so I got the idea that if businesses wanted us off of their front porches, then they needed to create a skate park. And it turned out that among the 40 businesses that surrounded the square in downtown Sonoma were really, really okay with us relocating to our very own park. And so what I ended up doing is I surveyed a bunch of adults, and then I went and got the punks and the skaters, and we went to the city, and lo and behold, 5 years later, there is now a skate park in Sonoma, California. And that was my first experience with a big organizing project. And while it isn't about accessibility in terms of disability, it is definitely about access to things that young people were left out of. And I just wanted to share that because it's something that I'm really proud of. And I am going to turn over the floor to my colleague.
So my name is Skye, Kantola, and I have been doing violence prevention and intervention work since about 2008, and I have been with the Multicultural Efforts to End Sexual Assault since 2013. I also volunteer as a board member for an organization called Pedagogy and Theater via Press. I'm also queer, trans, intersex, and autistic, and have other disabilities. And in my free time, I do a lot of artwork. So there's a photo of me about a year ago, whenever I was growing out my hair still at that time, tabling at a food security conference for Mesa. And then I decided to include a photo of some artwork of two hippos, a mama and a baby, hanging out together, and they are completely designed with flowers, Zentangle flowers. And there's a quote on the baby's tummy that is by C.C. McDonald, an amazing Black trans organizer. And she says, "We can't have no movement without love." And I felt like it was a very apt quote for this workshop today.
Hi everyone.
Hi, everyone.
My name is Jody Powers.
My name is Jody Powers.
And everybody.
I have a disability.
And this is we just touched it.
I'm a disability consultant.
Yeah. I'm tell the first tell of the and the we will tell you what people with disabilities.
I'm the board chair of the Governor's Council on People with Disabilities. Also identify as a person of faith.
And that really gets me to promote the dignity of people.
And that leads me to promote for the accessibility of the people.
No.
Motivates me to promote human dignity for all people.
Yeah. I have terrible palsy.
I have cerebral palsy.
And I'm visually impaired.
I'm visually impaired.
And take the idiom. And take the idiom.
In case you didn't know.
I have a speech impediment.
In case you didn't know, I have a speech impediment. It's okay to laugh.
That's it. I hope you all.
Yes, it is. I hope you are.
I do deal with depression.
I also deal with depression
and PTSD.
and PTSD.
Is that about it?
I think that's about it.
Video games.
I love to
Playing video games.
I love playing video games.
I love telling stories.
I love telling jokes.
No corny jokes.
I love corny jokes. I love corny jokes.
And I love pressing into home
And I love pressing into hard conversations.
And that one, I tell you that
I didn't catch that.
I have a totally joke for you.
I have a funny joke for you.
Tony. These
Corny joke for you. I have a corny joke for you. Tell it.
Yes, I do have pictures to show you.
Oh, since I don't have pictures to show you.
And when I was hot apple is football game.
Why does an owl get hot after a football game? That is not what you said. I mean, I don't know the answer.
When I was just hot apple is football game.
Why does it always get hot after a football game?
Yes, because on the hand.
Because all of the fans leave.
I
told you I love corny jokes. Jody's here all night. Okay, so
before we get into the meat of this,
Before we get into the meat of this,
I want to ask him the connection between ability to moving
I want to explain the
connection
Between sexual abuse, primary prevention, and accessible organization.
yeah. So Cierra is doing it for me,
Okay. Cierra is going to read each point for me,
and then I will Elizabeth.
and then I will elaborate a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, would
Yeah.
you like me to get started?
Yeah.
Isolation and poverty are two risk factors people with disabilities face. When organizations create accommodations to allow disabled people to easily access their facilities, services, programs, employment opportunities, conferences, and social activities, both of these risk factors are addressed.
It is easy to commit approach this with disability
It is easy to commit abuse against people with disabilities
because we're often isolated.
because we are often isolated.
Yeah. So everyone to decrease the risk of abuse,
So if we want to decrease our risk of abuse,
we need we live up to need for people with disabilities to interact with the community.
then we need to give people with disabilities an opportunity to interact with the community.
Yeah, with
Okay, it happened. So we,
yeah,
oh, I lost my train of thought.
with that
It happened.
I mean,
That's okay, it happened.
where is it?
Okay, read the next point. Prioritizing accessibility and accommodations communicate people with disabilities are welcome. I'm going to reread that.
Yeah.
Prioritizing accessibility and accommodations communicate to people with that people with disabilities are welcome. They are valuable, respected, and they matter.
And I cannot tell you what it means for me when it's
I cannot tell you what it means to me when I go into a place
and then and people say of the little things.
people pick up on the little things. People think
of the little
about the little things.
Whereas having someone help them fill out applications.
Such as having someone there to help people fill out applications.
Oh, that we are at a time for it.
Or we're at a conference.
Having someone to assist us with keywords.
Or when we're at a conference, having people assist us with getting materials.
Or food.
Or our food.
Or even having straws available.
Or even having straws available.
Communicate that we are important.
That communicates that we are important.
Yeah, and it's a bit sad.
And I think it's a bit bad.
That I really know that the planners that do that,
that the planners that do that,
no, I really know that
I really noticed
when that happens, because it's uncommon.
Because it's uncommon.
When you come into a place,
For me to come into a place
and for that welcome.
and I feel like I'm that welcome.
The more people with disabilities,
But more people with disabilities,
no more we
the more we
feel respected
the more we feel respected
and that we matter,
and that we matter,
the less that we will get into
the less likely we will get into
related that unhealthy
relationships that are unhealthy for us.
Yeah. So the idea where is that point?
Okay, so the idea of, read the next point. Prioritizing accessibility and accommodations may even cultivate a culture where all humans learn and express their needs. Currently, we have a hyper-focus of independence. If we desire to prevent violence, we need to break down the shame of having needs. And that's an awesome opportunity we have. When we communicate that all people are welcome,
and it's okay to have needs,
and it's okay to have needs,
we will that message will be communicated to everyone.
And that message is going to be communicated to everyone.
We really need to have a title.
We really need to have a partner.
A title. Culture. Yeah.
We really need to have a culture.
Well, we can express what you need,
we need to have a culture where we can express our emotional needs and our physical needs.
That will help boys, but victims of sexual abuse.
That will help both victims of abuse
and
the potential perpetrator
of
abuse.
This time, it will have outlets.
Because if people have outlets,
that will twist the need of their own.
Because I didn't catch that.
It would have open communication.
If we have open communication
Our needs, that will decrease arrest will be on it. That would
decrease our chances of violence, our risk for violence.
To put it be on it. To commit
opportunities to commit violence.
Yes. Yes. And accessibility is so important.
That's why accessibility is so important.
Yeah. Next step.
The importance, should I read?
Yes.
The importance of nothing about us without us.
Yes.
For too long, people with disabilities have had little to say in the systems and ideas that are meant for us, or to us. We know what we need to engage life. Trust us. Believe us.
This been concept.
This has been,
This been concept.
these are big concepts
That means a lot to me.
that mean a lot to me.
And that was a big graduation.
And that's why I'm a bit
fragile.
I'm a bit flustered right now.
Yeah, because they're emotional for me.
Because this is
Emotional to me.
emotional to me.
It's people have people we know what we need.
People don't know what we need.
No. We know what we need.
We know it.
Yeah, and we are living in an era
And we're living in an era
where we don't want other people to depend for us.
we're living in an era where we don't want other people to do things for us.
No,
No.
you get that time.
No, we're living in an era when, and then I did.
Well, we don't want people to depend for us.
We don't want people to decide for us
What we need
what we need
or what we want.
or what we want.
Every year around us,
If we look around us,
we will see that is not working.
if we look around us, we will see that that is not working.
That having other people design programs
Having other people design programs
and to be it.
and
She'll be it.
services
For us,
for us,
and not the way to empower us.
That is not the way to empower us.
Yeah. We need to be involved.
We need to be involved.
With disability.
I didn't catch the first part. This is not the best.
People with disabilities.
This does not just apply to people with disabilities.
This applies to
It applies to every group.
If your organization,
Of your organization,
if our organization,
in our organization,
if
in our organization,
working with people in public,
if our organizations are working with people in policy,
public,
privacy,
public,
Publishing.
POVER.
Poverty.
And we need to be embodied more in poverty.
If we're working on poverty, we need to invite people who are in poverty.
We need to involve
We need to involve them.
We need to engage them.
We need to engage them.
Yes. And this is for immigrants.
This is true for immigrants.
And all the unemployed
And all the other different
age groups.
All the other age groups.
Subcontractors.
From toddlers.
Age groups.
Many age groups. Oh, sorry.
Age.
I'm hearing money age. That's not correct.
This is trouble. All age groups.
This is the trouble among all age groups.
No. We are not there.
We're not getting it.
It's okay.
It's okay.
Let me try to say it another way.
Let me try to say it another way.
This is true if we are helping
This is true if we're helping
and different group of people.
any different group of people. Including people in the organization.
No. If we are all with group,
If we're all one group,
wait,
if we're all white,
yes,
okay, if we're all white,
who are having to make a difference,
who are trying to make a difference
for immigrants,
for immigrants,
we need to involve immigrants,
who are called immigrants,
and give them power
and give them power
and decision making.
and in decision making.
Because we won't know we won't know better what. There's no better what the name and we won't know.
Because they know better what they need than we would know.
And that's not what we're talking about today.
And that's what we're talking about today
With people with disabilities.
with people with disabilities.
We know what we need.
We know what we need.
And all those that we want.
To get the life that we want. Get is not the right word.
To live that life.
To live the life that I want.
That we want.
That we want. Everyone.
No. We always pick that.
Will I what? Repeat that.
Together.
All together. I thought you said that we need to be involved in order for us to get the life that we want.
Yes. That's not what we want to live.
The life that we want to live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
The next point. The disability community as a whole is huge. We are people with seen and unseen disabilities. We're blind, deaf, mobility diverse, neurodivergent. We process different, react to stimuli differently, we have different energy levels, and we have chronic pain. In other words, our community is super diverse.
And I was just reminded of this a couple of weeks ago.
And I was just reminded of this a couple of weeks ago.
Because of the boat hill.
Because I am
the board chair.
Because you're the board chair
of
of
the
the Governor's Council on People with Disabilities
for people with disabilities.
for people with disabilities.
Yeah, I was involved in planning this year's conference.
And I was involved in planning this year's conference.
And as it's moving around with planning for the for people with limited transportation,
And we did very well with people who needed transportation.
as well.
Jody said I did well advocating for transportation
With planning
planning.
for transportation.
Okay, Jody said I did well for planning for transportation.
For planning with the full assistance.
I didn't catch that.
Planning with the aids.
The aims,
The aids.
yeah,
Yeah.
like personal care attendant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, what did you say about it though?
I did really well.
I did really well
Planning with the
planning for those things.
for transportation.
But transportation,
No,
not but.
for
For transportation
the town
and personal care attendant.
and notice has I feel would be well for people for deaf
And other people did well for people who are deaf and hard of hearing.
planning.
Planning.
And then we were very grateful of people with sensory issues.
And we were very mindful of people with sensory issues.
However,
However,
we did not do well with getting singing for black.
However, we didn't do so well planning for people who are blind.
And that made me really
And that made me realize,
more of course we did.
of course we didn't,
We didn't involve friends
because we didn't involve blind people
in the planning process.
in the planning of the conference.
That we thought we were doing a good job.
We thought we were doing a good job.
We were wrong.
We were wrong.
Yeah. And that's the story.
So I'd just like to show you.
No, that story.
So this just shows you
Yeah. Disabled people cannot normally means disability.
right. That just shows that not everyone knows everyone's needs, especially for every different kind of disability.
And then when we need to inform
And that's why we need to involve a variety of people.
yeah.
Okay.
Before we go to the next one, I
Yeah.
want to note that we're running slow on time, so.
Okay. Okay. Most people don't realize what living with disabilities entails, and people with disabilities don't realize what different types of disabilities entail. So for these reasons, we need to engage multiple disabled people in our planning.
I was just address that.
And we just addressed that. Shall I read the next point?
Yeah.
Just because something is in compliance to the Americans with Disability Act does not mean something is welcoming and practical. So please ask real disabled people before starting building projects, programs, and events.
There you go.
Thank you. So this is a really important point.
The ADA, did not mean come in as welcoming.
The ADA does not automatically just mean that something's welcoming
Or as practical,
or accessible
practical,
or practical,
and it needs to be,
and it needs to be,
as it needs.
as it needs to be.
So there we need to ask real people with disabilities. This book do this training.
So this is why we need to ask people with real disabilities. You didn't say real disabilities. This is why we need to ask people with disabilities to be involved before the planning
And doing
and
it,
during the planning,
and not afterwards.
and not afterwards.
I would say will be more of that,
And it will be more complex. Everything will be more complex,
and it will cost more money.
and it will cost more money.
It will wait until the end of the project.
And
If we wait
if we wait
to bring in,
to bring in planners,
If we wait to bring in people with disabilities until the end of the project.
yeah, if you don't take away anything from my talk,
if you don't take away anything else from my talk,
remember that.
do it
Before doing
do it before
and doing,
and during,
not afterwards.
not afterwards.
Afterwards is bad.
Afterwards is bad.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about organizing praxis, and I wanted to define that praxis is a fancy academic word for combining theory and practice. I just really like the word praxis, so and it actually fits what we're talking about today. So I have some text-heavy slides, but I added these text-heavy slides so that if we did run short on time, or I just couldn't, have a chance to discuss everything, that people will still have text to refer back to. So first, I want to expand on something that Jody already talked about, which is actually involving people with disabilities. And, please don't find people with disabilities on the street and say, hey, do you want to be in leadership positions? There are already lots of people with disabilities. There are already lots of people with disabilities who are in leadership positions, and you can go look at different projects, local community projects, either in disability self-advocacy groups or other areas where people with disabilities are in leadership, and you can support them in the efforts they're making, and then also find where you have commonalities in your goals to work together on additional projects. I wanted to mention, just as an example, that one really awesome self-advocacy organization that has lots of local chapters is called ADAPT. And this is a national organization. What?
And then ADAPT.
Okay, Jody loves ADAPT. I do too. They do really cool self-advocacy, everything from policy to direct action. They have lots of chapters, and there are plenty of organizations if you want to look for engaged people with certain specific disabilities. Like Self-Advocates of Indiana does a lot of work, especially with people with cognitive or developmental disabilities. So if there's a community that you're especially worried is often under or misrepresented in the work that you're doing, there's often an organization where people with disabilities are already in leadership roles and really excited to be involved. And I just want to highlight a point that I said, whenever you have opportunities to involve people with disabilities, try to plan ahead and pay them. I'm not gonna go into a lot of detail because Cierra is gonna talk about budgeting and paying folks. And if it sounds like it requires time, effort, and emotional investment to go into the community, spend time with people, and understand what their passions are, it does, and that's okay. Doing really intersectional and cohesive organizing actually does require effort. But I want to emphasize that you don't have to have no job to be involved in the community. You can find a weekly or monthly commitment that you do to contribute to the community to help build those relationships. Another facet of organizing I wanted us to discuss is decision making and consensus building. And I want to talk about this because I think very often there are models of decision making that are very almost like majority rules, and it leaves out opportunities for dissent that will make your organizing better. So first off, that decision making should not just be a singular process, you do it once and you're done. Theoretically and hopefully it should be a continuing, ongoing process where you create a project together. There are lots of little moments of decision making throughout. And then after maybe you hit a big milestone and you implement something or you put out a project, then hopefully you also embedded evaluation to understand, did it get out the way that you wanted to? Did people participate? Did everyone have access to it? If there were problems, what were those and how can you make it better the next time? An example I wanted to put forward for this concept called test for consensus. I think I originally learned about testing for consensus as an applied meeting management strategy by Michael Wilkinson, who has an organization called Leadership Strategies, but he's published several amazing books about facilitation and meetings, and he's not necessarily very focused on accessibility, but his facilitation dynamics are often predicated on ideas of universal design, which means they're often much more accessible than the way that often professional settings don't do accessibility. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to give an example. So one of the easiest ways to test for consensus is to offer people the option to do 3 different responses. They can say, yes, I am ready to move forward with the decision that's being posed. Or they can say a flat hand and say, oh, well, I'm okay with us moving forward with this decision, but it's not necessarily my first choice. And then people can also, for example, give a thumbs down or put up a card that indicates they want to block the action. And that means the person has identified their really major problems with the decisions that people are trying to put forward. And then if anybody blocks the decision, that means, okay, we need to stop and figure out what are the problems and how do we remedy those before moving forward. That type of consensus building and decision making means everybody has the opportunity to say, yeah, I'm really excited, or this is fine. But they can also say, no, wait, I see a really major problem before you move forward. And that's so valuable to understand what the potential problems and pitfalls are before trying to implement something. Most of the time, I'm not going to go in super detail on this, but if you are interested in different types of consensus building decision making, usually people have designed them so that there's a certain number of times you can go through that process and be blocked before it really is time to move forward. Because while you want to try to prioritize accessibility and having everyone have a voice in the process, sometimes you just have to also get things done. So I'm not going into detail about the different ways you can test for consensus. I'm just giving you one example. But in this process, typically what happens is after 2 votes, if there's a block and it's you're not moving forward, there are ways for you to kind of work through that and make sure you continue instead of indefinitely going through testing for consensus and not getting anywhere. Okay, I'm going to talk about this slide really quick, and then I'm going to pause and see if Cierra and Jody have anything to offer so far, or add to what I've said so far. Accessible communication. One, it's hopefully obvious that whenever you're setting up meetings or giving presentations, that ideally you want to offer that information and that communication in as many formats as possible. whether that's having digital and printed materials, text and images, having things spoken and written, like in this case, having cart services, inviting translators to be a part of this. And I included a link as well to a really cool document called the Web Accessibility Guide that you can use if you're primarily going through digital means of communication to make sure that things that you're publishing online are as accessible to as many people as possible. And also just having options for how people might participate in meetings or conversations. So if they can come in person, or if they can call in by phone, or some people prefer being able to video conference in. A couple of other ideas for accessible communication is having only one person communicate at a time. This is helpful if you have sensory processing differences, or just, sorry, I saw a question. Okay. This is helpful if you have somebody with sensory processing differences, or if somebody is relying on a translator, so the translator can properly translate one person at a time. And also just for folks who might get overstimulated by lots of crosstalk at the same time. And then another thing that I often use when I'm facilitating workshops is something called the jargon finger. And if you can't see the video, it just means like I wiggle my little index finger at the facilitator. And that is like a communication guideline, Jody. All of us are doing it together now. Okay. This is just an indication to the facilitator that someone is like, you use the word, and I do not know what that word means, and I would really like assist them in understanding it. So, for example, I started off by saying, oh, this is what praxis means, because I realized it's a really academic word, and maybe a lot of people don't know what that means. But if I forgot, Jody behind me might be like, hey, what is praxis? And I would stop and say, hey, Jody, why are you giving me so many jargon fingers at once? What is happening? And Jody would say, I don't know what praxis is. Why are you using that word? Okay. We're all clearly in a silly mood. It's really close to the holidays. Okay, so that's the jargon fingers. And then making sure that if you have note takers, there's like a weirdly large amount written about note taking and the ethics of note taking. But I want to mention specifically something that's really important is that note takers document the actual words used by the people who are proposing whatever input they have. This is important because if someone says to me, maybe we're talking about like what are healthy relationships, and someone says, oh, well, to me a healthy relationship is when my partner asks before touching me. And if it says as a note taker, I write, oh, healthy relationships are consent around physical touch. That's not what they said. And it can indicate to the people participating that their words are not good enough, or not academic enough, or are somehow less than the words of the note taker. So it's so important to make sure that note takers are taking notes specifically about what was actually said, so that people know that their words, the way that they are seeing things, is already good. It's good enough, and it's accurate and true. Okay, do y'all have any additions?
Yes, I do.
Yes, I do.
You.
What?
You.
I do.
You.
Joke.
Yeah.
It's okay with having, I didn't catch that part. It's okay if there's an issue between a translator and someone with a speech disorder. Because it's an opportunity. Witness. It's an opportunity to learn and witness that we don't have to be perfect. That we don't have to be perfect.
communication
in our communication.
with that little with the big patient.
We just have to, we should just be patient.
And we can then go with it.
And we should just go with it.
And if you think about it,
And if you think about it,
well, it will be the most perfect presentation.
even when we hear the most perfect presentation,
We will not remember we won't remember most of it.
we won't remember most of it.
We will only be taking away a couple of points.
We will only be taking away a couple of points.
You will never put so much pressure on yourself.
So we don't need to put so much pressure on ourselves.
Having to be right
About having to get it right and perfect.
Maybe you will remember more about
And maybe you'll remember more about our presentation
it was not perfect.
because it was not perfect.
Yeah, let's lean into imperfection.
Let's lean into imperfection.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I just started watching Star Trek recently, and Cierra moved her laptop, and now Jody's elbow is space time traveling
nice!
across the screen. So I just want to encourage you to actually move it slightly back that way. So that Jody's elbow is just invading multiple screens. Okay. Somebody else asked a question about are abbreviations okay? Sometimes you just need to get through all of the letters of the abbreviation. So I would just encourage to make sure that, like, if you're starting a new meeting or a new group or something, that you do your best to always just define the abbreviation, and then after that go ahead. Similar to, like, if you're writing a paper or trying to make a publication, you typically define the abbreviation before you continue using it. And just have patience if somebody says, like, I have a really hard time with abbreviations. Can you repeat that? Or another type of accommodation you could do is actually print off all of the abbreviations, almost like a meeting glossary. You know, any of those types of things that would help people keep track of things. I know whenever I moved from doing community organizing to, like, paid violence prevention work, I had no idea what was going on most of the time because there are so many abbreviations in public health, you know, whether that's for organization titles or, you know, risk and protective factors, RP, RF, PS. You know, there's just, like, so many words that people abbreviate for simplicity, but it's only simple if you know. So make sure that people have opportunities to learn those things as they go, or have references like a printed glossary if there's a lot of abbreviations that happen in a recurring basis. Okay, so a few, these are kind of like larger philosophies that I know have guided my organizing practice. And I wanted to give ideas about how you can operationalize those. So one is an idea that I first heard whenever I read Paulo Freire in his book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and other similar books that he's written. And the idea is that we are all students and teachers simultaneously. What that means is whenever I go into a community, if I'm going to be working with them, I recognize I have a certain kind of expertise in living my life and in doing my work. But everybody else who's coming to contribute also has expertise in different parts of their life and in their work. Whether they're 3 years old or if they're 89, everyone has something to bring to the movement and to the work. And it's really important for me to be humble and know that just because I do something some way doesn't mean that there aren't better ways or maybe better ways for any given community, right? To be flexible and realize I should always be learning as well as trying to teach. And I think part of really good leadership means also recognizing whenever people are kind of new to doing organizing or educational work, what are their strengths and where can they grow? if you're facilitating some type of organizing or some type of meeting, how can you support people in succeeding? And how can you open opportunities for them to continue to develop skills? And ultimately, like if you're a really skills leader or collaborative of some kind, you can support each other in succeeding so that you have this really amazingly coordinated effort that you're doing, you know, as individuals, but also as part of this larger movement that you're working toward. Another thing that I think is very similar to this idea is that no one is trying to be saved, and you and I are not saviors. Yeah. I think there's this amazing Indigenous organizer, Lilla Watson, who has this amazing quote that says, "If you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up in mine, then let us work together." I included, there's a Zen table image of a howling wolf because I love this quote so much that I incorporated it into that artwork. But like, just thinking, you know, how often it's so easy for any of us to go into an organization or a group of people and think, oh, well, they don't talk the way I do. They don't hold meetings the way I do. They don't think about things the way that I do, so they must not be doing as good. And, you know, if I just help them with a few things, maybe they can be as good as I am. But that's this, like, really toxic savior mentality, you know, just basically, we often talk about believing survivors, but we should also be believing the communities and trusting the communities that we're working with to know their problems inside and out and also have ideas for the solution. And it's really up to organizers to help facilitate that process, not to come in with all of our supposed answers into any community. Something else that I think is really important is to recognize that people have to be able to come into a space as their whole selves, and that includes the trauma that they're bringing, which could be interpersonal, historical, intergenerational, and communal. And recognizing that it's not a matter of if we will hurt each other in our processes and have more relationships, it's when. So when people do hurt each other in this work, how are we going to support each other in mending those relationships and doing healing? How, you know, if someone becomes upset with somebody else, how is that resolved in a mutually beneficial manner, in a mutually beneficial way? You know, sometimes, even very unintentionally, any of us can bring our own, like, baggage of past experiences to current relationships. And instead of stigmatizing people for doing that, we can say, hey, you know, what caused you to feel so upset about this moment? And how can we support you in working on that so that you can have better and more complete relationships with the people that we're all working together on whatever goal we have? And also, I know that this isn't possible in every, for example, like work setting, but I think it would be so amazing if people actually talked ahead of time about their potential trauma triggers and helped decide who was going to work on certain things by alleviating their opportunities for coming into contact with those triggers. So if I was working at a community, some type of coordinated community clinic as a social worker, and I knew for me a trigger was suicidal ideation, and I had a colleague whose biggest trigger was, you know, finding men who are physically violent abusers. We might talk and say, hey, you know, if you have someone where men who are physical abusers is a really big part of someone's case, and I run into somebody who has a lot of suicidal ideation, we might work together to swap clients and see, okay, can you be the primary contact case manager for this person? I know that that is not possible in all situations, but it's something that I think we should at least think about and consider in our work, because often it's not. I wanted to just do a brief shout out that trauma is an embodied experience, and so is healing. There are so many people who have done work around the neurobiology of trauma and how trauma is embodied, and I really want to just encourage and challenge us to think about what are the ways that we can incorporate physical movement into our organizing. You know, instead of always just sitting around a table, maybe we could create body sculptures about what our emotions are like for that day or where we're at. I included an image of some artwork I made for the International Transgender Day of Remembrance in 2018, and this is a day where people get together and talk about all of the people who have been murdered, trans people who have been murdered through hate violence. And I honestly have no idea where the phrase came from, but it's something that's so prevalent in trans communities. We say, remember our dead and fight like hell for the living. It's just like such a strong, powerful statement to me, and I think about how can I embody that as well in all of my work. I'm just double checking. Okay, yeah, so I have 2 more slides. So, we're good. Okay. Accountability in projects. So what I mean by that is I kind of created like the bullet points are kind of step by step. So ideally, we have a goal that we've come to realize we all share, and we decide, okay, this is how we want to do it, and people get to volunteer and say, hey, I can help in that way. And then ideally, hopefully, the project or the action steps that you have determined have deadlines and evaluation plans. So that means whenever we create a project, we say, hey, this step, it would be really great if it was done by this date, and the person who volunteered is good with that deadline date. And at the same time, we also think, okay, how do we know that that step, the way that we did it, was successful? Or how do we know if there are ways that we can improve? So having those questions in mind whenever you're designing projects. Additionally, something that I think often is left out is having deadlines that actually have leeway for delays and problems or surprises, because if anybody on this webinar has ever done community organizing, you know there's always something that comes up. It could be personal, like somebody having a lot of issues with their health, or it could be that somebody suddenly has a work trip that they weren't anticipating. Something always comes up, and so you want to set up people for success in part by realizing that sometimes deadlines can't be met, and if that happens, how can you cushion the delay in the deadline for people? And then this is something I talked to several other self-advocates about recently, that it's so valuable that whenever people volunteer, they're actually trusted to follow through or delegate what they need to do. So instead of, I don't know if anybody has ever worked on group projects where, somebody says they'll do a part of the project, and then maybe there's somebody who is very untrusting of others in the group and slowly takes over all of their other responsibilities that were delegated, that people volunteered for, or maybe they do something and then tell the group, oh, this is done. And now the person who volunteers will feel very put out because they were not trusted to actually complete the things that they said that they would do. In doing that, it also means that the point person or team leader for that project has people to reach out to for support. So if they do have something come up, they can say, hey, I don't have time to do this part of the project, but I know you have these skills. Would you have time as well to help me meet this deadline? And that's really important that the point person also knows that they have people that they can reach out to for support, so that instead of failing alone or not completing the task, they have additional support in place. And then, of course, once a given task is completed or a deadline is reached, there is opportunities for open feedback from other people. And that ideally should include both like positive feedback, like, oh, this is something you did really well, and also constructive criticism from other people to say, oh, maybe in the future, one way you could make this project more accessible is to add this, or to do this in a different way. But hopefully that those things happen together, positive feedback and constructive criticism for growth. And I want to emphasize, constructive criticism is not, wow, you did this really terribly. Or just, you want to think about how can the feedback be phrased in a way that supports the person in growing and developing additional skills. And then, so this is also really important. If a task or project is not done or a deadline isn't met, are the consequences for not completing that deadline by the deadline, are those known in advance? It happens really often in organizations that you don't know what the consequences are, and maybe the consequence in an organization that has not as good communication, the consequence might be the boss comes and yells at you. Hopefully you don't work in an organization where your boss comes and yells at you, but like, I'm sure many of us have worked with people in leadership who don't necessarily have great leadership or communication skills. So it's really valuable to know what happens if this doesn't get done. Is it just that it reflects poorly on the organization? Does it mean certain people don't have access to the event? Something like that. And then when failures and mistakes do happen, because they're going to happen for everybody in whatever project you're working on, that those are seen as opportunities for improvement rather than opportunities for punishment. And then lastly, that evaluation is transparent and continual. So that means that even people in, like, if you have a hierarchical structure in whatever group you're working with, that even people who don't necessarily have a direct supervisor, is their feedback and the ways that they're encouraged to improve, is that still visible to other people in the organization so that everyone knows they have a voice and an opportunity to contribute and to give feedback in that organization. The last concept that I wanted to discuss, because I found a lot of people have never heard of this phrase, is mutual aid networking. This is an idea created in disability communities that says, if we all contribute what we can to a particular goal, we don't have to contribute equally, but we can contribute equitably based on what we have to achieve that goal. Their mutualaidnetwork.org says, what would it look like if everyone were doing the work they loved, what they felt called to do? And what if everyone had the opportunity to build their skills to the maximum capabilities and then apply them to making their communities whole and beautiful? Just the idea that, you know, if I'm not feeling very well, so it's not very feasible for me to travel to a meeting, doesn't make my contribution to the meeting less than someone who's physically able to attend. That seems probably pretty logical to most people, but there's lots of other ways that that can happen where people need to contribute different amounts, and that's okay. I also have a quote from Audre Lorde here that there's often one sentence that's taken out of context, but I think the passage itself that she published in Sister Outsider is so powerful. It says, those of us who stand outside the circle of this society's definition of acceptable women, those of us who have been forged in the crucibles of difference, those of us who are poor, who are lesbians, who are Black, who are older, know that survival is not an academic skill. It is learning how to take our differences and make them strengths. For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. And this fact is only threatening to those women who still define the master's house as their only source of support. I think, like, all of Audre Lorde's writing is just mind-blowing and relevant in every way. But also, I wanted to think more deeply about the things that we define as professional, the things that seem taken for granted in how we work. I really want to encourage people to not take those for granted, to say, okay, just because I've been taught to work with other people in this way doesn't mean it's always the best way to work with them. As a new manager, one of the things that I talked about with our newest student worker is I discussed with her that I don't expect her to ask permission for her to take care of her body. If she needs to go to the restroom or have a call with her family or something else, I might ask her to tell me if she's like leaving the office for a little bit, but I don't need to know in detail what she needs to do to take care of herself, and it's okay for her to take breaks. And even though that seems really simple, I have found that even just that little bit of like trusted freedom is often so rare in working situations. That was my last slide. I'm just going to pause briefly to look and see. There looks like there's another question that I don't want to. Oh, someone said you can't see me, but I'm shaking my head. Yes, this. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we are going to go ahead to Cierra, budgeting for accessibility.
Yes. Wonderful. So I am going to talk about a few things related to budgeting. And I promise that your brain will probably not gloss over when I hear the word budgeting. I'm just like, what? But This is really exciting, y'all. Okay, next slide, please. I just want us to have a moment of mindfulness, if you will. This is a picture of Jody Human, and for those of you who do not know who this woman is, she, like, if I had to compare it to a movement that you might know about, I would say that you probably are aware of the name Gloria Steinem or Bella Abzug or Audre Lorde. This woman, Jody Human, is a civil rights activist and a leader in disability-related civil rights whatnot. So there's a picture on the upper left side of Judy with some colleagues, and I open with this slide as a challenge for us to think about where we are as individuals in terms of our understanding of disability justice, not necessarily just disability rights, but disability justice, and accessibility both in our personal practices, including to ourselves, and also within our organization. And so I really want to challenge us to think right now in this moment about what services and programs are truly accessible, thinking about the major categories such as being blind or being part of the deaf community, and things like that. Thinking about those things with regard to our website, but also our crisis intervention services and primary prevention programs. And I want to tell you something that my family therapist says to me and my family quite often, which is get off your own back. Audre Lorde said, I believe it's Audre Lorde, said, when you know better, do better. And so I'm asking you to practice mindfulness today and not go down that guilt rabbit hole or the self-shaming or even really dissing your organization in your mind or just verbally, and just kind of notice where you are and take stock. So this is Jody Human. She is a well-known civil rights activist, and I have a picture, even though I almost had an opportunity to be in the same room with her in November, on November 18th. The Governor's Council for People with Disabilities, I said it correct this time, had a wonderful conference, and the topic was challenging assumptions. And you would think that a renowned civil rights activist could get everything that they needed to be aligned properly to go and attend the keynote at this conference. But Judy was not able to find a CPA or a certified personal assistant who could travel with her. Now, it could, for practical purposes, she could have hired somebody in Indiana. However, it is much easier to have a caregiver, a care attendant who knows you and knows your preferences and everything, especially if you're going to be far away from home. So Judy couldn't make it. So we did get to Skype with her, and she gave us a keynote, and it was wonderful. But I think that this is just an example of how structurally isolated people with disabilities are across many different basic needs. I wanted to point out that picture, the black and white one, is from 1977. This is 42 years ago. When I was 2 years old, there were no accommodations of any kind in any public schools or anywhere really. It didn't matter in the grand scheme to those who were making decisions. And what she was doing here is advocating for what are called 504 accommodations or 504 accommodations, which grew into the IEP or Individualized Education Plan or special needs classrooms grew up out of the result of this. And I just wanted to send a shout out to Jody because of the work that her and her colleagues did. My children are protected when they're in school by both 504 and IEPs. And so they've experienced sexual violence at age 14 and as a result have the onset of some pretty severe mental health challenges. And this protects them from being like suspended or the other word. What the heck is the other word? Expelled. Yeah, for trauma triggers. And so the work of this person has changed my life, and I know a lot of people's lives. So I want to read what she said. These are a couple of sentences that she said at the conference that really struck me. She said, "Not following the ADA is discrimination. And 29 years ago, that might have been okay. But today, accessibility is no longer a negotiable thing. She, in fact, will not play at an inaccessible venue." And, like, in terms of getting off your back, you don't know what you don't know, and that's okay. And that it's important that we recognize that is because we have privilege. We don't know these accessibility things because we haven't had to. Mm-hmm. And so for you to onboard yourself, so to speak, with in terms of accessibility is you taking charge of a thing that makes power disparities among people dissipate when you actively engage in accessibility in all of your projects. Like Jody said, opened up today with saying that it just communicates that you're welcome. I just tried to attach the slide. That's kind of funny. So moving power is a must for culture change. We are trying to end sexual violence, and that means that we need to make it a difficult thing to do. And right now, we live in a society where sexual violence is just the norm. And so part of our work, in fact, I would say that one of the main aim of our work is to notice how power is operating and shift it when it is operating in a negative way. And I think a lot of agencies actually think that they might be ADA accessible, or they might think that on a trajectory of where we want to go, if the purpose horizon is being fully connected and included, and just jargon finger, being connectedness is a protection. It offers protection against sexual violence perpetration. And so a fully connected network of people, social networks, medical networks, you name it, those are protections for us. So that's our purpose horizon. And I think just if you look at this picture, a lot of people think that they are at that second arrow where you're somewhere like, yes, we're ADA compliant, so we're a little past that. But I put this slide up here to do kind of a reality check and say that the vast majority of individuals in America are behind the ADA. Like, we don't know about things like your documents need to be able to be read by a thing called an OCR, and it is it recognizes text and reads it aloud. And so you might not know that if you put a table in your document that the OCR can't read that. Okay, so what I'm saying is the starting line is not where we think it is. We are far behind where we actually think we are. And so, like we may stop at putting a ramp at our doors, or moving the brochures from being 5 feet up on the wall to being more like around 4 or 3.5 feet on the wall. And we might think, oh, that communicates that we're accessible. But does it say anywhere on your website or on your doors what accessibility measures that you have taken? Do people know when they call that they might be able to have access to an American Sign Language interpreter or an interpreter for another language. I felt like when I worked in direct service in a rape crisis and domestic violence shelter, that was secret. We weren't keeping it secret. We just didn't really know that we should be telling everybody that we can have access to pretty much any language using a language line. So we need, as mainstream organizations, to take control of what that looks like and put it out there. Don't hide it, and don't assume that people know or that they will ask, because you're going to probably not encourage people to access your services. Ooh, I need to hurry up. Okay.
Can I actually pause for a minute?
Yeah.
Okay, so I am responsible for technology and kind of the moderation of today. And so I wanted to make an executive request that we go to 2:40 so that Cierra has time to do what she's doing, because we are recording this. And so that means if you need to leave at 2:30, that's okay. You will also end up getting a link to whenever we publish the webinar with the closed caption. Mm-hmm. But I just really want Cierra to have time to state what she's saying. So we're going to violate the professional rule of webinars and go 10 minutes after. But I think that will be helpful for us so that we can include information and Cierra can finish saying what she's saying. Okay.
Yeah. That's fabulous. Thank you. Yeah. I feel like I'm on a crew that's modeling good practices right now. Okay. I think we can go to the next slide though. So I just wanted to give you, this is real life for me. This was my test. Jody tested me. It was all in fun. This was a couple of years ago, I feel like, where Jody got a ride to Indy, and I went and visited. We were working on something, and I went to her hotel room. So you are looking at a picture of what her hotel room looks like. And you can, so what I want to ask you all out there, everybody who is tuned in right now, could you please put in the question what you think is wrong with this room? That is the test that Jody gave me. So let's see how you do. So I'm just going to talk for a second while you're thinking about what you think the problem with this room setup might be. So when you come into the door, what you're looking at is you've got two beds on the right side, and you've got a bank of bio needs rooms on the right side. When you walk through the door, the entire back wall is a window. And, okay, so essentially, when I was looking at that picture, can you go back one slide? Awesome. Thanks. And you can jump in, Jody, obviously. I think you want to. Just to let you know.
This hotel room was ADA accredited.
Just to let you know, this room was ADA compliant.
Yeah.
This room.
This example, this child told me ADA, this for people with disabilities.
This is just a really good example of, even though something may be ADA compliant, it may not work for all people with disabilities. I lost the end.
It may not be practical.
It may not be practical for people with disabilities. Yeah. Okay, so when Jody gave me this quiz, I felt like it was something with the bathroom. So Jody is a power chair user. And so has anybody given us, okay. So essentially what's happened is that as a power chair user, Jody would have to get in and out of her chair multiple times to do a bevy of business in the restroom, because they separated the room with the shower from the room with the toilet, and there was a wall in between them and doors. And these doors were not the open closed doors, they were slidey doors. What? And
that
that was good. The slidey doors are better. Will you say why the slidey doors are better?
because if that they people will still move.
Oh, okay. Because it gives people with wheelchairs more room to maneuver.
But the issue was the toilet was in one room.
Oh, the issue was the toilet was in one room.
And the tub was in the next room.
And the shower was in the next room.
So I would have to do the restroom in one room.
So I'd have to go to the restroom in one room. And then get back in my chair. And go in the other room.
Use
the shower. And so for people with different energy levels, this is really a barrier. Impractical. Right. Yeah. That's exactly the point that I wanted to make with that. And I think that anybody should check out the idea of spoon theory if you want to learn more about that. And so it would have been helpful for them to talk to people with disabilities. Instead of just going with the bare minimum
on the ADA.
On the ADA. Absolutely. Okay, next slide. So now we're getting into, that's the point that I really wanted to make, was that we will just continue to perpetuate the inaccessibility problem because we don't know what we don't know. And so you need a budget. You need a budget for several things. Not only are you budgeting for the thing that we all think about when we think about budgets, which is money. You need more money. Like Jody said, these things cost more money, but you also need to budget for more time, and you also need to budget for more space. So first, I want to talk about time. We need more time, like today.
Yes.
We are in our extra time, and we're being accessible, and that's okay. This is going to be recorded. And so something else that I've learned as a result of attending this Governor's Council for People with Disabilities conference is that they, as a practical matter, did not start until well after 9 a.m. And I feel like I can hear all the conference planners out there going, what? They're like, you lose an hour if you don't start at 8. And the reason why this is so important for people with disabilities is that there is a lot of work that goes into getting ready for people with, some who use chairs for mobility, for just a variety of things. It's hard to get going in the morning, number one. Number two, some disabilities make transitions. Some people with disabilities have a hard time with transitions. And by starting later, we are communicating that we understand that this is going to be a difference in your day, in the schedule that you usually do. And so waiting is just a really respectful thing to do. Additionally, one of the things that mainstream organizations love to do is give you a 5-minute tapping time between sessions. And really best practice is to give 15 minutes transition time at the minimum. And
I would have a hour. Okay. I feel.
I would say a half an hour would be ideal. That's what Jody said. We know we're freaking people out.
So every if you don't have to do the restroom,
But even if you don't have to use the restroom. Yes, people can use that time to connect. And as they get the opportunity. Oh. As they give an opportunity to take care of themselves.
Did you get that? Amazing half hour to take care of my needs.
I might need a half hour to take care of my needs.
Without the Cierra a half hour to connect.
And that would give Cierra a half hour to connect. Back and forth. Better.
Yeah.
Better.
You're able to people with disability.
And it would help people with disabilities.
It will help everyone.
And it will help everyone. But it will help everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can attest to that. I have never been to a better conference in Indiana than that conference. Okay. So in terms of back to budgeting for time, preparation for meetings takes longer. The more layers of accessibility that you add, the more technical problems you will have, and the more it eats into your meeting time. A lot of people don't know that you should make every image in all of your materials be able to talk, and with that, you right-click on your mouse. Is that right? Yeah. Right-click on your mouse, and you can enter what is called alt text. It means alternative text. So when a reader goes over an image, it will read the description of the image, and that takes forever to do. I want to talk now really quickly about money. And I want to challenge all of you. Every single person who's out there who is with a mainstream organization, if this is a challenge for the potential funders who are listening to us right now, people from state departments of health, DOJ, the CDC, jargon fingers, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Department of Justice, the Office for Violence Against Women. I think that that all of us should think about putting an accessibility statement in our request for proposals to encourage people to pay attention to these things ahead of time. And so I think that what would be really helpful to me as a person who not only plans projects, but also implements, develops them, implements them, and evaluates them, I want to be told what I should be asking for. And so I think that it would be really helpful for funders to put in something in the budget statement even about accessibility. So what I mean by that is I think it is the ethical and equitable thing to do to provide for transportation, and you have to account for many forms of transportation. So if you're paying the state or federal minimum for mileage, that is not going to work for a lot of people, and you need to be able to have other options such as an Uber or a Lyft. And for people with some anxiety disorders, those are not accessible and they won't work. And some people prefer accessible transportation. And if your town is lucky enough or your city is lucky enough to have accessible transportation, that should be a line item in your budget. And the way that I would handle that, because prices are so different all across the United States, is I would make phone calls to people to try to determine how much it would cost. We set aside approximately, I want to say around $900, and that only pays for Jody to come see us in Indianapolis 3 times. Skye, will you go to the next slide, and I'll just show people. 1,400. Oh, okay. It's 1,400. We have 2 minutes left. Okay. I want to advocate for people to put between $100 and $150 per hour for American Sign Language translators. Build that into your budget ahead of time. And for the live captioning, you want to budget between $100 and $150 per hour so that you can have those. And I have more to say, but we are out of time. I just wanted to show you another example of how we are unsupported by the current structures out there. So for Jody to come an hour and 20 minutes both ways, it costs us $580. And I want anybody in Indiana who is out there listening, please call me to this. They are wonderful. They will drive to the ends of Indiana for you and bring a person anywhere you need, but you have to pay for it. And Jody, do you want to add?
Has changed its policy.
Oh, they've changed their policy?
The swirling in the area.
Oh, no. Now they're just going to pick people up in the Indianapolis area? Oh, in the surrounding, the donut counties. There's 5 counties. And so that actually leaves out people in my county.
Yeah.
Okay, so we do need to move on. I do want to let people know that there are no questions, but go ahead and put questions in if you have them, and we will answer them offline. We have told you several times, I'm assuming you've been with us before, we told you several times about the wonderful resources we're creating, but go to the next slide, Skye. I want to show a new one. So Vera Institute of Justice has phenomenal work out there about working with violence and people with disabilities. And this website, which is available in your handout too, every week I go there and there's more and more and more accessibility related files, and it is nerdtastic. So please check those out. I wanted to mention one other thing. Next slide, please. You can find a glorious glossary on this website. This is our hub, the Indiana Disability Justice and Violence Prevention Resource Hub, which was created by the Indiana Abuse Prevention Disability Task Force, and it's free and available to everyone. So please check out those resources. I believe that is everything. We have a channel. We have 3 previous webinars that we did that are now available for you to look at and listen to. And I believe the last slide, we do need to let you know that unfortunately our colleague Richard Probst will not be available to do a webinar with us on January 7th. We do need to postpone that until a time to be determined. And so you will get, if you're registered for that, you'll get an email. Richard had, he said I could share this. He had a terrible infection that sent him to the heart center, and it ended up resulting in his left leg being amputated above the knee. And now he is having to relearn all of the ways of moving around, and he is at home healing. And so we are sending out our love vibes and our care and compassion vibes to Richard, and we promise to bring you this webinar a little bit later, probably around spring or summer. It's going to be great. And Skye, will you talk about the last one?
Oh yeah, we have 2 more webinars this year that will happen in January. So we will postpone and let you know about the 9th webinar that Cierra just mentioned, and then we will also have another webinar that will be on January 10th, most likely. You will get updates if you've registered for that webinar or any of the past ones to let you know specifically what we're putting in there. We think and hope that we will be working with some sex educators to provide a webinar on accessible sex and safer sex for people with disabilities on January 10th. So thank you all so much for hanging on this long, and we are very excited to later action this and publish it so that other folks can also access it.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much.
Jody's contact info is in there too for you. You need it.
There is our contact info.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us.
very much.
We'll see you next time.
Yeah.
I will go ahead and end the webinar.